He said not to tell anyone, that it would be our secret. He said he would kill me if I opened my mouth. And I, at just 12 years old, believed in that monster. The blood on my legs was just the beginning of the nightmare. Good morning, my dears. My name is Clotilde, but everyone calls me VID. I am 79 years old. I was born and raised in Presidente Prudente, in the interior of Sao Paulo. And today I'm going to tell you a story that I've kept for almost 67 years. A story that many in my family don't even know because shame and fear silenced me for so long. If you are watching this video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This old lady here thanks you from the bottom of her heart. Tell me in the comments which part of Brazil you are watching me from. Sometimes I wonder how my words reach places I've never been in my life, and that gives me a joy I can't even explain. Also comment on something you like to do. I'm looking for new leisure activities to enjoy in my free time. I look forward to reading all the comments. Let's start at the beginning, when I was still the little princess of the house before darkness entered through the front door disguised as family. I was born in 1946, right after World War II. Presidente Prudente was a very different city than it is today. We lived in a big house near the center, with a huge backyard where I played with my rag dolls. My father, Alides, worked in the railroad offices. A respected man who always came home with an impeccable suit, even after a full day of work. Mom, Mrs. Isora, was a primary school teacher, the kind who knew all the students' names by heart. She was an elegant woman, always wearing a well-ironed dress and tidy hair, even indoors. She said that a decent woman should always be presentable, because you never know who will knock on the door. We were a middle-class family at a time when that meant having privileges that most people didn't have. We had a maid, Sebastiana, who slept at home and took care of everything while my parents worked. She was like a second mother to me. He taught me ghost stories that made me tremble with fear and laugh at the same time. I was an only child, the center of attention. Mom and Dad tried to have more children, but after 2 miscarriages, the doctors said it was dangerous for Mom to try again. So all their hopes, dreams, and ambitions were placed on me. And I confess that I took advantage of that position. I was spoiled, yes, I won't deny it. She won the best dolls, the most beautiful dresses, and had piano lessons with the Italian teacher who lived near the church. Clotilde will be a talented girl. Mom told the neighbors to come over for coffee on Saturday afternoons. She knows how to sew, embroider, and can already play 3 entire songs on the piano. Mornings at school were easy for me. Being the daughter of the most respected teacher in town had its advantages. The other teachers always praised me, even when I didn't deserve it. In the afternoons, after homework, I could play in the yard or on the sidewalk with the other children on the street. We played hopscotch, tops, and hide and seek until the sun began to set. Sundays were special. We woke up early to go to Mass at the main church of São Sebastião. Mom would dress me in my best dress, put ribbons in my hair, and make me promise to be quiet during the celebration. After Mass, we went to have lunch at the house of my maternal grandmother, Grandma Aparecida, who lived a few blocks from the church. Sunday lunch was a feast. Several uncles, aunts, and cousins gathered around the large wooden table in the backyard under the mango tree. Grandma Aparecida made pasta with free-range chicken sauce that took 2 days to prepare. The smell of that food is one of the most vivid memories I have of my happy childhood. Grandpa Benedito, Grandmother Aparecida's husband, was a quiet but affectionate man. He had worked on the farm since he was a boy, and even after retiring, he still maintained an impeccable vegetable garden in the backyard. It was from him that I received the best fruits, mangoes, jabuticaba, guavas, picked freshly, still warm from the sun. My paternal grandmother, Grandma Olinda, was a widow since I was a baby. Lived alone in a small house on the other side of town. We visited her once a month, always bringing her supplies and medicine. She was a lady of few words, always dressed in black, but who smiled with her eyes when she saw me approaching. It was 1957. I was 11 years old when things started to change. Grandma Aparecida, the one who made the best pasta in the world, started to feel strong pains. At first, everyone thought it was just age. She was already 67 years old at that time, but the pain did not go away and she became increasingly thinner and weaker. "It's a tumor," I heard Dad whisper to Mom one night when they thought I was asleep. The doctor said it had already spread throughout my body. I didn't quite understand what that meant, but I knew it was something serious by the way Mom started crying, muffling her sobs with her hands so I wouldn't hear. Grandma Aparicita only lasted 3 months after the diagnosis. I watched my mother, always so strong and in control, slowly fall apart. She started missing work to take care of her sick mother. She spent days and nights by her bedside, giving her medicine, changing her sheets, praying. I remember the day my grandmother passed away. It was a Sunday, ironically. There was no pasta, no laughter in the backyard, just silence and the sound of the adults' suppressed crying. I sat on the porch step, not really understanding why everyone was so sad, but feeling the weight of that absence that would never be filled. The funeral was the next day. The whole town seemed to be at the cemetery. Grandma Aparicita was known and loved by many. Mom was devastated, leaning on my father's arm, looking like he was going to faint at any moment. That was the day I saw my grandfather Benedito, a widower at the age of 70, cry for the first time. Not loud tears, but silent tears that ran down his wrinkled face as he stared at the coffin being lowered into the ground. In the following weeks, life tried to return to normal, but there was a shadow in our house. Mom was different, distant. She tried to smile at me, but I could tell it wasn't the same smile as before. Dad did everything he could to keep everything going. He took me to and from school, helped Sebastiana with some chores around the house, tried to cheer up Mom with little gifts. That's when my grandfather Benedito started to show up at home more. At first, he only came for Sunday lunch, which was now at our house. Then he started showing up during the week as well. Your grandfather is very lonely in that house, Dad explained. Your mother is the only daughter who lives in the city. All the uncles are far away. It's our responsibility to take care of him now. I liked Grandpa. He always had mint candies in his pocket and told me stories about when he was a boy in the countryside. Stories of jaguars that appeared on the plantation, of fishing in the river, of Sao Joao festivals, where he met my grandmother. They were simple stories, but they made me travel to a time I had never known. One day, about 2 months after Grandma's funeral, my father came home with a serious expression, called Mom, and the two of them talked in low voices in the kitchen for a long time. I tried to listen, but Sebastiana sent me to my room to do my homework. At dinner that night, Dad made the announcement. Clotilde, your grandfather is going to come live with us. He can't stay alone in that house anymore. It's too big for him to handle and he keeps forgetting things. Yesterday you left the stove on and it could have caused a fire. Mom nodded, though her eyes looked worried. Let's get the back room ready for him. I've already spoken to Sebastiana. She will help bring his things tomorrow. I was excited about the idea. Having Grandpa home meant more stories, more mints, more attention. I didn't realize at the time how uncomfortable Mom seemed with the situation. I didn't understand the wary look she and Dad exchanged. How could I have imagined that decision made out of love and family duty would completely change the course of my life? How could I have known that behind those country stories and those mint candies there was a monster hiding that would destroy my childhood forever? That night I slept peacefully, dreaming of the stories that Grandpa would tell me every day. Little did I know that the real nightmares were about to begin. Grandpa Benedito arrived on a Wednesday morning, carrying only an old leather suitcase and a cardboard box with his most precious belongings. I was at school when he moved into the back room, the one after the service area, separated from the main house by a small covered corridor. Now Grandpa will be part of our routine, Clotilde. Mom explained as she prepared dinner that day. He is already old and needs our care. Be a good girl and help where you can. Yes. At first, his presence seemed like a blessing. Grandpa woke up early, even before Sebastiana, and already had coffee made when everyone got up. He had a simple but efficient way of doing things. He fixed the sink faucet that was always dripping, fixed the creaky gate, and started a small vegetable garden in the corner of the yard. My father was happy to see that, despite his 70 years, Grandpa still had strength and determination. Your Benedito has a good hand for these things, Dad commented approvingly. He's a man who's been used to hard work since he was a boy. The first signs that something wasn't right started subtly, like thin clouds announcing a distant storm. I noticed that Mom avoided being alone with Grandpa. When he came into the kitchen while she was cooking, Mom would quickly find an excuse to leave or ask me to stay there with her. At the time, I thought it was just the still fresh mourning for Grandma's death that made the atmosphere heavy between them. Grandpa started to pay me even more attention. He didn't just tell me stories, but now he brought me little gifts, colorful ribbons for my hair, sweets from Mr. Joaquim's shop, even a rag doll he made himself. This made me radiant. I had never received so much attention from an adult who seemed to have infinite time for me. It was about a month after his arrival that I noticed the first real change in his behavior. We were having dinner, the four of us, me, Mom, Dad, and Grandpa. Sebastiana had already retreated to her room in the back. My father mentioned a raise he had gotten in the work. With this extra money, we can even think about enrolling Clotilde in those ballet classes she asks for so much, Dad said, smiling at me. I almost jumped out of my chair with joy, but Grandpa's voice interrupted my celebration. Ballet. He grumbled, banging his fork on the plate with more force than necessary. Why waste money on nonsense? A girl has to learn useful things, cooking, sewing, taking care of the house. This business of jumping around in ballet shoes is something for people from the big city who have nothing to do. An uncomfortable silence took over the table. My father, always so confident, seemed to wilt at Grandpa's harsh words. Mom looked at her plate, avoiding confrontation. Dad, with all due respect, Clotilde's education is our decision. My father finally answered, but his voice sounded less confident than usual. Grandpa gave a dry laugh. It's your decision. You're raising this girl full of desires. In my time, children obeyed and that was it. They didn't get to choose what they wanted to do or not. That was the first time I saw my grandfather's authoritarian side, but it was far from the last. Little by little, he began to interfere in everything. In mealtimes, in the clothes I wore, even in the volume of the radio when Dad listened to the football game. This house is becoming a mess, he complained. In my time, a self-respecting man kept order in the home. It was as if he wanted to own everything, including people. I noticed that Dad, to avoid arguments, started giving in on little things. Mom, in turn, became increasingly silent, more withdrawn. The worst was when my father had to travel for work. It happened once a month. He would usually spend 2 or 3 days away visiting other railway stations. During those days, Grandpa acted as if he were the man of the house, giving orders to everyone, including Sebastiana, who began to complain quietly. Mr. Benedito is not my boss, she whispered to Mom one afternoon when she thought I wasn't listening. The man thinks he can even control the air we breathe. It was during one of my father's trips in August 1958 that something happened that really scared me for the first time. Mom had gone to take some clothes to a sick cousin and would only be back later that afternoon. Sebastiana was washing clothes in the sink in the back. I was in the living room doing my math homework. Grandpa came into the room, sat in the armchair across from me and watched me in silence. I felt a strange shiver on the back of my neck, as if something wasn't right. Come here, Clotilde, he said after a few minutes. Let Grandpa see if you are doing this homework properly. I approached holding my notebook. He tapped his knee, indicating that I should sit there. Reluctantly, I obeyed. After all, he was my grandfather and I had always been taught to respect my elders. You're becoming quite a young lady, he murmured, running his hand through my hair in a way that made me uncomfortable. You're almost old enough to get married. I'm only 12, Grandpa, I replied, confused. In my time, a 12-year-old girl was already promised. Your grandmother was 14 when she married me. His hand ran down my back, in a caress that no longer felt like a grandfather's caress. You need to learn to be a woman soon. At that moment, Sebastian entered the room carrying a basket of clothes. Grandpa immediately removed his hand from my back and changed his tone of voice. This girl doesn't even know how to do division. In my time, we learned this with a spanking. I stood up quickly, relieved by the interruption. Something in Sebastiana's eyes told me she had noticed something strange because she frowned and kept her eyes on me for the rest of the afternoon. In the evening, after dinner, I went to my room early, saying that I had a headache. I actually wanted to get away from Grandpa. There was something about the way he looked at me now that made me afraid. A fear that I couldn't fully explain or understand. Lying in my bed, I heard my mother and grandfather talking in the kitchen. The voices started out low, but soon grew louder. Alcides is very soft with this girl. Grandpa's voice echoed through the hallway. And you're also creating a useless one. Father, please. Mom's voice sounded tired. Clotilde is a good girl, studious, polite. Educated? He interrupted with a cold laugh. She barely looks at my face when I talk to her. In my time, children looked their elders in the eye and obeyed without question. Times have changed, father, and I ask that you respect our way of raising our daughter." There was a noise, as if someone had hit the table. "Respect? Respect is what you should have had for me. I'm your father. After your mother died, you threw me into this back room like I was an old dog. Nobody threw you anywhere." Mom's voice interjected. "Are we trying to take care of you, give you comfort?" "Comfort?" He laughed again, in that way that gave me chills. "Stick me in that cubicle while you guys stay in the big house? Do they serve me last at the table, tell me to shut up when I give advice?" There was silence. And then Mom's voice was lower now. "If you are not happy here, you can go back home. Nobody forced you to come." Another BAC on the stronger table. "Is this what you want? Get rid of your old father, send me back to be alone until I die? Is this how you honor your mother? She must be turning in her grave in shame for you." I covered my ears with the pillow, not wanting to hear any more. That night, I had nightmares about shadows chasing me around the house. The next morning, Mom had dark circles under her eyes and had barely touched her coffee. Grandpa, on the other hand, looked strangely pleased, as if he had won some battle. When Dad came back from his trip 2 days later, I realized Mom hadn't said anything about the argument. She smiled tightly, saying everything was fine. Grandpa, in turn, was kinder than ever to my father, offering to help with whatever was needed, praising him for working so hard to support the family. It was as if two different people lived inside my grandfather. The kind, helpful man who appeared when my father was home and the controlling tyrant who emerged as soon as Dad walked out the door. A week later, Sebastiana resigned. She said she had gotten a better job in a house downtown, but I could see in her eyes that there was another reason. Before leaving, she hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear, "Take care of yourself, girl. And if anything bad happens, tell your mother right away." I didn't understand the warning at the time, but soon, very soon, I would understand perfectly what she meant. With Sebastiana gone, Mom started spending more time at home. She asked for a few weeks off from school, saying she needed to get the house in order. I think deep down she didn't want to leave me alone with Grandpa. This brought me some temporary relief, but it didn't last long. Soon Mom had to go back to school. The school principal had made it clear that he couldn't extend her leave any longer. And Dad started taking longer trips, sometimes being away for a whole week. It was during one of these weeks, in November 1958, that my world completely fell apart. Mom had gone to a meeting at school that would last until late. I was in my room, already in my nightgown, brushing my hair before bed. The door opened without knocking. Grandpa was standing there, watching me with a look that had never been seen before. I will never forget it. A look that mixed something animalistic with a calculating coldness that chilled me to the core. "Your mother won't be back until late," he said, entering the room and closing the door behind him. "We need to have an adult-to-adult conversation, Clotilde." I knew at that moment that something terrible was going to happen. A primitive fear took hold of me, making my heart beat so hard it felt like it was going to burst from my chest. What happened in the following minutes is something that still haunts me on the darkest nights. His rough hands, his weight pinning me to the bed, the excruciating pain, my screams muffled by the wrinkled hand that covered my mouth, the smell of kashika and sour sweat, the horrible words whispered in my ear. "If you tell anyone, I'll kill you and your mother," he said when he finished, adjusting his clothes as if nothing had happened. "No one will believe you anyway. They'll say you provoked Grandpa, that you're a shameless girl." I lay paralyzed in bed for a long time after he left, unable to cry, unable to even breathe properly. A piece of me died that night. The confident, cheerful, and dreamy girl was gone forever, replaced by an empty shell, full of shame and fear. The next morning I couldn't get up to go to school. My body ached in ways I never imagined possible. There was blood on my nightgown and on the sheets. When Mom came to see why I hadn't gotten up, I lied. He said he had cramps, that he had woken up in those days. She seemed to believe me, brought me some tea and let me stay home. Grandpa spent the whole day on the street, thank God. When he returned at night, he acted as if nothing had happened. He had dinner normally, told stories to my father, made jokes, and didn't even look in my direction. I wanted to scream, I wanted to tell him everything, but his words echoed in my head. "I'll kill you and your mother." And I believed. With the innocence and terror of a 12-year-old, I believed he was capable of this. Thus began my personal hell. What should have been a home turned into a prison of terror. His presence, his smell, his voice, everything caused me panic. And the worst part is that no one noticed, or maybe they didn't want to notice. Nights became my greatest fear. Every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, every time a floorboard creaked, I curled up in bed, praying he wouldn't come. But he always came, not every night, which was almost worse, because the uncertainty kept me in a constant state of alert, of anticipatory terror. I started to change. I stopped eating right, I lost weight. My grades at school dropped. I didn't want to go out to play or talk to anyone anymore. I started sleeping with a pair of scissors under my pillow, even though I knew I would never have the courage to use them. "What's happening to you, daughter?" Mom asked worriedly. "You look like a ghost walking around. I wanted to tell you so much." The words were on the tip of my tongue, but then I saw Grandpa standing in the doorway, watching me with that look that said it all, and fear silenced me again. 3 months passed like this. 3 months that seemed like 3 centuries. 3 months in which every night was torture, every day an exercise in pretense. I had learned to exist in a space between life and death, not completely alive, because something fundamental had been destroyed in me, but also not dead, because my body insisted on continuing to function, to breathe, to move automatically through the world. It was in February 1959, at the height of summer, that everything finally came to light. Not because I had the courage to tell them, I didn't have that courage, but because my body spoke for me. Grandpa had been particularly violent the night before. Mom and Dad had gone to a birthday party and wouldn't be back until late. He took the opportunity to drink more than usual and came to my room earlier than usual. "Today Grandpa is going to teach you some new things," he said with that smile that made me sick to my stomach. I tried to resist for the first time. I screamed, kicked, scratched. It only made him angrier. By the time he was done, I was more bruised than usual. My arms were purple from being held so tight, my shoulders were scratched, and I had a cut on my lip from when he hit me to keep me quiet. The next morning, I couldn't hide the bruises. It was summer, unbearably hot, and Mom came into the room while I was still sleeping. When she pulled back the blanket to wake me, she saw the bruises on my arms, the dried blood on my cut lip. Her scream woke the whole house. My mother's scream on that hot February morning was like a rip in the fabric of the silence that had suffocated me for months. Her eyes roamed my scarred body, stopping at each bruise, each scratch, the cut on my lip. She saw the horror grow on her face as the realization of what was happening finally hit her like a lightning bolt. "My God, Clotilde, who did this to you?" she asked, sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking as they reached for my bruised arms. I couldn't answer. It was like a lump had formed in my throat, blocking any words. After months of keeping this horrible secret, I didn't know how to begin, how to get the words out of my mouth, how to tell my own mother that her father, the man she had welcomed into our home, was destroying my life night after night. Dad appeared in the doorway, still buttoning his pajama shirt, his hair disheveled like someone who had just woken up. "What happened?" he asked, alarmed by the scream. His eyes widened when he saw me. I had never seen my father like this before. His face pale, his pupils dilated with shock, his hands clenched into fists so tight that his knuckles turned white for a terrifying moment. I thought Grandpa would show up too, that he would come into the room with that look of fake concern, pretending not to know anything, ready to make up some lie. My whole body shuddered. My mother had been shocked by the possibility, but it was this obvious fear, this physical reaction of terror that finally made my mother understand. I saw the exact moment that realization crossed her face. Her eyes filled with tears and she covered her mouth with her hand, as if to stop an even louder scream from escaping. "It was him, wasn't it?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Was it my father?" I didn't need to answer with words. My silence, the tears that finally began to stream down my face, the uncontrollable shaking of my body, all confirmed what she feared. My father staggered as if he had been punched in the stomach. He looked at my mother, then at me, then back at her, searching for some explanation that didn't exist, some meaning in a horror that made no sense at all. "How long?" my mother asked, holding my hands in hers, her eyes fixed on mine. "How long has this been going on, my daughter?" Three months, I managed to stammer out in a barely audible voice. "Since November 3rd months, 90 days. To them it was a shock, a sudden and devastating revelation. For me it had been an eternity in hell. Minute by minute, second by second. My mother's face contorted into an expression I had never seen before. A mixture of pain, anger, and guilt that seemed to age her 10 years in 10 seconds. "Why didn't you tell us before?" my father asked in a hoarse voice. Grandpa's words echoed in my head. "If you tell anyone, I'll kill you and your mother." Even now, with the secret out in the open, that threat still held sway over me. He said he would kill us if I told. I spoke between sobs. He said no one would believe me, that they would say I was provoking him. My father made a strange sound, like a wounded animal. I saw something change in his eyes. The confusion and shock gave way to a fury I had never seen in this man who was always so calm and controlled. He turned abruptly and left the room. I heard his heavy footsteps down the hall towards the back room. Mom jumped up, suddenly alert. "Oh no!" she screamed, running after him. I was left alone in bed, still wrapped in the stained sheets, listening to the distant sounds of a scuffle, raised voices, something breaking, a dull thud. I wanted to get up, see what was happening, but my body felt like lead. I couldn't move a muscle. Minutes later, or maybe hours, time seemed distorted. Mom came back. She was pale, her hair disheveled, and her eyes red from crying so much. She sat down next to me on the bed and hugged me. It was a hug unlike any other she had ever given me, desperate, as if she feared I might disappear at any moment. "He's gone," she murmured into my hair. "Your father threw him out. He's never coming back. You're safe now." I wanted to believe those words, wanted to feel relieved, freed. But the fear had seeped so deeply into me that it felt like it was part of my very skin. "What if he comes back tonight?" I asked, my voice choked with the terror that this moment had brought. The possibility made me nervous. "What if he comes for me while you're asleep?" Mom took my face in her hands, forcing me to look her in the eyes. "It won't happen." She said it with a firmness that left no room for doubt. "Your father is out there right now, changing all the locks. And then we'll go to the police." The word police sent a new wave of panic through me. It meant that other people would know, that I would have to tell everything all over again, relive every horrible detail. "I don't want to go," I cried, hiding my face in my hands. "I don't want anyone to know." "I understand your fear, my child," Mom said, stroking my hair. "But we need to do this so he never hurts you or any other girl again." That day we didn't go to the police. Instead, Mom took me to the doctor, an old family friend who made house calls with discretion. I remember his face growing darker and darker as he examined me, asking me questions in a low voice that I could barely answer. "She's going to need some care," he told my mother when he was done. "Not just physical." The next morning, still sore and exhausted, I was taken to the police station. It was an intimidating gray building in the city center. Mom held my hand the entire time as Dad walked a few steps ahead of us, shoulders tense, jaw clenched with pent-up anger, as he led us into a small room with peeling walls and a noisy fan that only circulated the warm air. A gray-mustachioed police officer listened to our story, writing everything down in a worn notebook. His face remained impassive, professional, but I saw something change in his eyes as he realized what had happened. "We need the girl's statement," he said, looking more at my parents than me. "Alone?" "No," I protested, gripping my mother's arm tightly. "I don't want to be alone, it's procedure," the sheriff explained with surprising gentleness. "But your mother can stay if you prefer." So, with my mother by my side, I told her everything. Every night, every abuse, every threat. The words came out in sob-interrupted spurts as I stared at my hands, unable to face the adults in the room. When I finished, the silence was so thick it seemed to have its own weight. The sheriff cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "We'll find him," he assured me. "He won't escape," but he did escape, at least for a while. The next few weeks were a blur of doctors, of questions repeated over and over, of pitying looks following me everywhere. The news spread quickly, as it does in small towns. The whispers followed me down the hallways at school, on the way to church, in the shops downtown. "It's that girl. They say that her grandfather, poor thing, was no longer Clotilde, the spoiled brat, daughter of a railroad worker and a respected teacher. She was the victim, an object of morbid curiosity and superficial pity." At home, things also changed drastically. My parents, devastated by the guilt of not having realized what was happening, converted that guilt into overprotection. I was never alone again. There was always someone with me, Mom, Dad, an aunt who came to spend some time with us. The windows now had new locks and Dad would double, triple check that all the doors were securely closed before we went to sleep. They moved me to their room. My old room, the one where the nightmare had happened so many times, was locked. No one went in there. It was as if that space had been contaminated forever. The nights were the worst. Even though I knew I was sure he could no longer reach me, the nightmares came without fail. I would wake up screaming, drenched in cold sweat, feeling his weight on me, the smell of kashika, his rough hands on my skin. Mom would hug me until I stopped shaking, murmuring words of comfort that could not reach the dark place where my fear lived. The police looked everywhere for Grandpa. He had disappeared like smoke. Some said he had gone back to the interior of Minas Gerais, where he was born. Others said he had fled to Mato Grosso, where no one knew him. There were even those who said he had killed himself by throwing himself into the river. I didn't believe any of these stories. In my childish and terrified heart, I was sure he was nearby, watching me, waiting for the right moment to carry out his threat. In April 1959, 2 months after the discovery, I began therapy. It was a rare thing at that time. A small town like Presidente Prudente barely had psychiatrists, let alone psychologists specializing in childhood trauma. But my parents moved mountains to find help. Mom even sold her jewelry to pay for the consultations in Sao Paulo, where we traveled once a week. Dr. Helena was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. Her office was cozy, with soft armchairs and a bookshelf full of books and small toys. "No need to say anything if you want," she told me at our first meeting. "We can just sit here in silence until you feel comfortable." That's what we did for the first few sessions. I would sit and look out the window, sometimes picking up one of the toys and playing with it absently. She would just watch, jotting down occasional notes, never pressuring me. "What happened to you was not your fault," she said one day, breaking our usual silence. "Nothing you did or didn't do caused this. It's entirely his fault." Those simple, direct words hit me like a thunderbolt. I hadn't realized until then how much I blamed myself for not telling him sooner, for not resisting more, for believing his threats. But I could have screamed, I whispered, tears flowing freely. I could have told Mommy that first day. If I had, "You were a child facing something no child should have to face." Dr. Helena replied, "You did it to survive, and you did. This shows that you are stronger than you think." Strong. I didn't feel strong. I felt broken, dirty, irreparably damaged. "I'll never be the same again," I confessed, giving voice to my greatest fear. "I'll never be normal again." "Normal is a complicated word," she said, tilting her head thoughtfully. "You won't be the same again. That's true. No one stays the same after a trauma. But that doesn't mean you can't have a full, happy, meaningful life." I wanted to believe her. I wanted so badly to believe that there was a future for me, beyond this horror, beyond the constant fear, beyond the sleepless nights and the nightmares. May came, bringing heavy rains that seemed never-ending. The sky remained constantly gray, as if reflecting the state of my soul. The police had all but given up on finding Grandpa. The case was closed, although the chief of police assured him that he would be arrested if he ever resurfaced. It was at this low point, when hope seemed more distant than ever, that Mom and Dad started talking about moving. Leaving Presidente Prudente, starting over somewhere else where no one knew our story, where I wouldn't be was the girl in the case. Sao Paulo, maybe. Dad suggested it over dinner. "I have a cousin who works at the post office there. He said he could get me something." The idea of leaving the only city I knew, of abandoning the house where I had grown up, despite the terror of the last few months, scared me almost as much as the possibility of staying. "But what about school? And my friends?" I asked, although I knew I had few friends now. Most of them had moved away when the scandal came to light, either out of shame or at the behest of parents who didn't want their daughters involved. "There are better schools in Sao Paulo," Mom replied, forcing an optimistic smile. "And you'll make new friends? Friends who don't know, who won't look at you that way." I knew what she meant. The way everyone was looking at me now, with pity, with morbid curiosity, or worse, with that uncomfortable expression of someone who doesn't know what to say. Maybe, I thought, maybe starting over somewhere else was exactly what I needed. Somewhere where no one knew, where I could just be Clotilde, not the victim. Somewhere where every corner didn't bring back terrible memories, where every shadow didn't make me imagine he was lurking. When? I asked. The first time in months I'd felt something like hope. Soon, Dad answered, squeezing my hand across the table. As soon as I got the job, in a few weeks, maybe. That night, lying in bed, improvised in my parents' room, staring at the ceiling as the rain beat against the windows, I allowed myself to imagine this new beginning, a new house, a new school, new people who didn't know my past. Maybe there I could start to rebuild the broken pieces of myself. Maybe there I could one day sleep without fear. But before we could carry out this plan, before I could escape that city and the memories that haunted me at every corner, something happened that changed everything again. Something that neither of us could have foreseen and that would bring out strengths that I didn't even know I had. It was at the beginning of June, almost 4 months after my parents discovered the abuse, that the storm that seemed to have passed returned with full force, and this time I would be in the eye of the storm, unable to hide, forced to face the monster of my nightmares one last time. It was a Saturday in June. It was raining lightly in Presidente Prudent. That sad rain that doesn't wash anything, only makes everything wetter and heavier. I spent the morning helping Mom separate clothes to donate. We were getting ready for the move, although we still didn't have a set date. Dad had gone downtown to settle some pending matters at the bank. The two of us were alone in the house, doors and windows locked as always. Ever since that fateful day, the sound of the doorbell tore through the silence like thunder. Mom and I looked at each other, scared. No, we were expecting no one. Friends and relatives knew to let us know before visiting. It was part of the new house safety rules. Stay here. Mom instructed, her suddenly tense face in the living room. I heard her cautiously approaching the door, asking who it was. The answer was muffled by the rain, but I recognized the timbre of her voice. It was Dona Terezinha, our neighbor across the street, a widow who had always been kind to me. Mom opened the door, but only a crack, keeping the security chain hooked. Exhausted. I heard Dona Terezinha say, her voice unusually urgent. I need to tell you something. It's about good, it's about your father. My blood ran cold in my veins. Just the indirect mention of him was enough to paralyze me with fear. What's wrong with him? My mother's voice sounded sharp as a knife. He's back. Dona Terezinha spoke so quietly that I almost didn't hear her. I saw him last night walking down the street behind us. I'm sure it was him. He looked different. Long beard, thinner, but it was him. My legs gave out and I leaned against the wall to keep from falling. He was back. The monster from my nightmares was back, probably to carry out his threat. Are you absolutely sure? Mom asked, her voice shaking slightly. Absolutely. Dona Terezinha confirmed. He didn't see me, it was dark, but I thought you should know so you could be careful. I heard Mom quickly thank me and close the door. When she came back into the living room and saw me leaning against the wall, white as wax, she didn't need to ask if I had heard. My face said it all. I'm going to call your father, she said, trying to sound calm, but she saw the fear in her eyes. The same fear I felt. Dad arrived home 20 minutes later, out of breath from running in the rain. His face was a mask of controlled fury. I'm going to the police station right now, he announced, still standing in the entrance hall, dripping water on the floor. They need to arrest him. He's been on the run for months. What if they don't do anything? Mom asked, what were we all thinking? The police hadn't tried very hard to find him the first time. Why should it be any different now? A tense conversation ensued in the kitchen. Mom and Dad argued in low voices, occasionally glancing at me as I sat silently at the table. They talked about running away that very night, about staying with relatives in another city until everything was sorted out, about hiring someone to guard the house. And then, in the middle of this anguished conversation, the power went out. The house was plunged into darkness, except for the occasional flash of lightning that the now intensifying storm threw against the windows. A complete silence fell over the three of us as we realized our sudden vulnerability. It's just the rain, Dad finally said, trying to sound confident. I'll get the candles. As he went to the pantry for candles and matches, Mom came over to me, pulled up a chair, and sat beside me, holding my hand in the darkness. It's going to be okay, she whispered, though her voice betrayed it. His own uncertainty. It was at that moment that we heard the noise. A soft crack, as if someone was forcing open the back door, the one that led to the backyard, near the little room where Grandpa had lived. Dad came running back from the pantry, candles and matches forgotten. Did you hear that? He asked in a tense voice. Before we could answer, another crack, louder this time. Unmistakable. Someone was really trying to get in through the back door to the bedroom now. Dad ordered in an urgent whisper. Lock yourselves in there. I'll see what it is. No. I exclaimed, clutching his arm desperately. The idea of being separated, of Dad facing alone what could very well be Grandpa trying to break into the house, filled me with dread. Another crack, followed by the unmistakable sound of wood giving way. Whoever it was had gotten in. At that moment, I realized we were trapped. The house had only two exits, the front door and the back door, the latter now compromised. To get to the front door, we would have to cross the entire room, leaving ourselves exposed. As if reading my thoughts, Dad pulled us into the kitchen cupboard. A narrow space where we kept brooms and cleaning supplies. Stay here, he whispered. Don't make any noise. Wedged into that cramped space, Mom hugged me tightly, muffling even the sound of our breathing. I heard Dad leave the kitchen, his footsteps light on the hardwood floor I knew so well. The next few minutes were the longest of my life. Each second seemed to drag as we tried to hear any sound from the house, other than the patter of the rain on the roof and the occasional roar of thunder. Then voices, muffled at first, then louder. Dad's voice, tense, furious, and another voice I recognized immediately, which made me tremble uncontrollably in Mom's arms. Grandpa, the monster had really come back. I couldn't make out the exact words, only the tone, accusations, denials, rising anger. The voices were coming from the living room, getting closer to the kitchen. His daughter Grandpa's voice suddenly became clear, cutting through the air like a razor. These girls these days make things up, come on TV and think they're the only ones who can. Shut up! My father yelled. Get out of my house now or I swear to God I'll kill you this time. A scuffle, bodies colliding, something breaking. Mom pulled me even tighter against her, her silent tears wetting my hair. I'm not leaving without talking to that liar, Grandpa screamed. She has to admit she made all this up. Look what you've done to me. You've turned me into a fugitive, a criminal. Another crash. The unmistakable sound of a body falling heavily to the floor. Mom couldn't take it anymore, pushed open the cupboard door and came out, pulling me with her. The scene we found in the kitchen, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning, would be etched in my memory forever. My father was slumped near the table, a trickle of blood running down his forehead. Grandpa was standing, holding a broken bottle, obviously the weapon he had used against Father. When he saw us, his face twisted into a smile that was anything but human. There you are, he said, taking a step toward us. My ungrateful daughter and my lying granddaughter. He was almost unrecognizable. His white beard was now long and dirty. His eyes were bloodshot, his soaked clothes stuck to his thin body. He smelled of liquor, sweat, and hatred. Fear paralyzed me as it had so many times before, but then something different happened. Something I hadn't even expected, a rage I hadn't known existed inside me. A fury that had built up over those months of terror and suffering suddenly exploded, sweeping away the fear. I didn't lie, I shouted, my voice sounding strangely adult to my own ears. You know what you did, you know. Grandpa seemed stunned for a moment. Maybe by my audacity, maybe by seeing the terrified girl he knew transformed into someone who dared to stand up to him. That moment of hesitation, that was all Mom needed. In one swift movement, she grabbed the heavy iron skillet from the stove and, before Grandpa could react, hit him with all her strength on the side of the head. The impact was brutal. Grandpa staggered, dropping the broken bottle, and fell to his knees, stunned. Blood began to trickle from a cut above his ear. Dad was already getting to his feet, staggering but determined. I saw in his eyes the same thing I felt in my heart. There would be no more fear, no more escape. That night, one way or another, the nightmare would end. What happened next seemed to happen in slow motion. Grandpa, even wounded, tried to get up, gripping the edge of the table for support. His eyes, clouded by pain and alcohol, fixed on me with pure hatred. You, he growled, trying to take a step toward me. You destroyed everything. Dad stepped between us, shielding me with his body. At the same time, Mom ran to the phone on the wall, which miraculously still worked despite the lack of light, and dialed quickly. Police, she screamed into the receiver. Please come quickly. 247 Acacia Street. He's broken into our house. He's trying to attack our daughter. Grandpa, realizing he was cornered, made one last desperate attempt. In an unexpectedly agile move for a man his age, he grabbed a knife from the sink and lunged at my father. It all happened so quickly. My father dodged, trying to disarm Grandpa. There was a brief, violent struggle. I saw the blade of the knife catch the flash of lightning as the two men fought for control. Then, a scream. The knife fell to the floor with a metallic clang. Grandpa recoiled, clutching his arm, blood trickling between his fingers. At that moment, the lights came back on, flooding the kitchen with a sudden brightness that seemed almost supernatural after so long in the dark. Darkness. The scene froze like a macabre photograph. My father gasping for breath, blood on his forehead. My mother still holding the phone, her eyes wide, Grandpa against the wall, injured, and I standing in the middle of the kitchen, witnessing the end of a nightmare that had lasted far too long. Sirens began to wail in the distance, fast approaching. Grandpa looked around like a cornered animal searching for an escape route, but there was nowhere to go. The doors and windows he could use to escape were on the other side of the house, blocked by us. It was at that moment, as the sirens came closer and the inevitability of capture became clear, that I saw something break in his eyes. It wasn't regret or shame, nothing so human. It was just the realization that he had lost, that there would be no more power over us, that his impunity was over. "You don't know what you've done," he muttered, sliding down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, still holding his injured arm. "They don't know." Minutes later, the house was raided by police. Grandpa was detained, handcuffed, despite weak protests about his injury. I remember him looking at me one last time as they dragged him out. A look that no longer had the power to terrify me, because now I knew something he didn't. I had survived. I had faced the monster and was still standing. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Paramedics treating the cut on my father's forehead, police officers taking our statements, curious neighbors crowding the sidewalk despite the rain, trying to understand what had happened. Sitting in the living room, wrapped in a blanket that someone had placed over my shoulders, I watched all that movement with a strange feeling of detachment. It was like I was floating above the scene, watching everything happen to someone else, not me. It was only when everyone finally left, the police officers promising to return the next morning for more questions, the paramedics having assured them no one needed to go to the hospital, the neighbors reluctantly dispersing, as reality began to set in. The three of us were in the room, exhausted, still processing what had happened. An awkward silence hung in the air. Not the oppressive silence of fear that had been our constant companion for months, but a different, almost peaceful silence. "He finished," Dad finally said, his voice low but firm. "He won't hurt you anymore, Clotilde. Never again." For the first time in a long time, I truly believed those words. The nightmare was over. Not the way we expected, not the way we had planned, but it was over. That night, for the first time in months, I slept without nightmares, a deep, restful sleep that seemed to wash away some of the horror that had accumulated in my young soul. The next morning when I woke up, a strange feeling came over me. It took me a few seconds to identify her, I was so unfamiliar with her. It was hope, a small flame of hope that maybe life could be good again. Grandpa was formally charged and arrested. The trial, a few months later, was quick. The evidence was overwhelming, especially after he broke into our home, confirming all accusations with their own actions. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison. I never saw him again after that night in the kitchen. I never wanted to see. I learned years later that he died in prison, of a heart attack in the 5th year of his sentence. The news didn't bring me joy, but it didn't bring me sadness either, just a strange emptiness, as if a particularly painful chapter in a book had finally been turned. Our move to Sao Paulo ended up happening anyway, a few months after the incident. We needed a new beginning, away from the memories, away from the stares, away from the whispers that persisted despite Grandpa's condemnation. In Sao Paulo, little by little, we rebuilt our lives. I continued therapy with Dr. Helena, who helped me understand that what had happened did not define me, that I was more, much more than the violence I had suffered. Mom went back to teaching. Now in a bigger school, where no one knew our past. Dad got a good job at the post office thanks to the cousin he mentioned. Little by little, life began to gain color again. It was a long and difficult road. There were relapses, moments when the fear returned with full force, nights when the nightmares returned as vivid as before. But each passing day, each small victory, making a new friend, getting a full night's sleep without waking up screaming, being able to talk about what had happened without falling apart, was a step toward healing. At the age of 17, I met Roberto, a kind and patient young man, who would become my husband a few years later. He was the first person outside of my family and therapy that I told what had happened. Your reaction, compassion without pity, anger on my behalf, without treating me like a victim, was an important part of my healing process. Life went on. I became a teacher like my mother. I married Roberto when I was 23. We had 3 wonderful children, 2 boys and a girl. I knew the joy of being a mother, then a grandmother and now a great-grandmother. I have built a full, meaningful life, full of love and purpose. Today, at 79 years old, looking back, I see that Dr. Helena was right. What happened to me did not define me. It changed me, yes. How could it not change? But it didn't determine who I would become. It was a horrible chapter in my story, not the whole story. I learned that healing doesn't always mean forgetting. Sometimes it means remembering without the pain destroying you. It means carrying the scars, but not letting them paralyze you. It means transforming your own pain into compassion for others. In strength to protect those you love. In wisdom to recognize both the darkness and the light that exists in all of us. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that surviving is just the beginning. True triumph lies in living fully, authentically, courageously, despite the wounds, despite the fears, despite the losses. That's why I tell this story today, not to shock or cause pity. But so that maybe some other girl, some other woman, some other person who carries invisible wounds knows that she is not alone, that the darkness, no matter how thick it seems, does not last forever. May the light on the other side be waiting for those who have the courage to keep walking. The verdict of that trial still echoes in my ears as if it were yesterday. Guilty, the judge said, banging his gavel on the table. Grandpa got 12 years in prison, but to me no sentence would be enough to make up for what he had done. Even though I knew he was behind bars, the scars remained open in my soul. The day after the trial, Mom, Dad, and I had a serious talk in our kitchen. The air was heavy, not just because of Grandpa's condemnation, but because we all felt that something was still unresolved. Official justice had done its job, but there was a greater, deeper justice that remained pending. 1 year, Dad murmured, running his hand through his hair, which was already streaked with white. He can get out early for good behavior and then we'll always be looking over our shoulder. Mom sighed, her eyes revealing the impossible weight she carried. The pain of knowing that her own father, the man who was supposed to protect her family, had destroyed the innocence of his only daughter. We need to do something definitive, she said with a determination I'd never seen before in her eyes, which were always so kind. Something that ensures he will never have the chance to hurt Clotilde again. It was there, in that kitchen, that the plan began to take shape. Not a vengeful or violent plan. My parents were never violent people. It was a plan of protection, of starting over, of rebuilding our lives, in a way that man could never reach us again. We're leaving Presidente Prudent, announced Dad. Not just moving to another city, but disappearing, rebuilding our lives where he can never find us, even if he gets out of prison one day. Sao Paulo had been our initial plan, but now it seemed too obvious. It was the first place he would look for us if he ever regained his freedom. We needed something more radical, safer. The North, Mom suggested, surprising us. My cousin Durvalina moved to Belém do Pará years ago. He says it's another world, another life. No one would know us there. Bethlehem. The name sounded like an exotic promise of new beginnings. Almost 2,000 kilometers away from Presidente Prudent, separated not only by geography, but by completely different landscapes, climates and cultures. But what about jobs? Clotilde's school, our home, questioned Dad, the concern of providing for the family never leaving his mind. We'll sell everything, Mom replied with surprising firmness. We will change the name if necessary. We will do whatever it takes to protect our daughter. I watched my parents in that conversation, amazed at their determination, at the love they showed for me. We're willing to give up everything. The security of established jobs, the home they had built with so much sacrifice, the closeness to friends and family, all there to protect me, to give me a chance to start over. What do you think, Clotilde? Dad asked, finally turning to me. Are you ready for a new beginning? To leave all this behind? I looked around the kitchen, at the walls that had witnessed so many memories. Some happy, some terrible. I thought about school where everyone looked at me with pity or morbid curiosity. I thought about the streets of Presidente Prudente, which now seemed to always hide shadows. Every corner a reminder of what had happened. Yes, I replied, feeling for the first time in many months something like enthusiasm. I want to go, I want to start over. Preparations for our new life began discreetly, almost in secret. We didn't want anyone to know where we were going, not even the few relatives we still kept in touch with. Dad told only his boss, making up a story about health problems that required treatment in another climate. We sold the house to a couple from Sao Paulo who never even visited the property. They bought through a broker, attracted by the below-market price we offered to speed up the sale. Larger pieces of furniture were included in the sale. The rest was donated or sold in small batches so as not to attract attention. Mom wrote to her cousin in Bethlehem, asking for help finding a house to rent and information about schools and possible jobs. The letters were sent to an intermediate address, the home of a trusted coworker, to avoid any trace in case anyone from Grandpa's family tried to locate us. Within 2 months, everything was ready. We left Presidente Prudente in the early hours of October 1959, when the city was still asleep. A single taxi carrying 3 people and 6 suitcases, all that was left of our previous life. We went to Bauru, where we would take the train to Sao Paulo and from there a plane to Belém. The trip was long and tiring. The plane, a novelty for me, in another situation would have been exciting, but I was too exhausted, too emotionally drained to feel anything, other than a vague relief that we were getting further and further away from Presidente Prudente. We arrived in Belém on a hot, humid afternoon that made my clothes stick to my body instantly. Durvalina, my mother's cousin, was waiting for us at the small airport with a warm smile and tight hugs. She didn't know the details of what had happened. Mom had just told us that we had serious problems and needed to start over. But your no questions asked hospitality was just what we needed. The Belém of 1959 was a fascinating city, so different from anything I knew that at times it seemed as if we had traveled to another country, not just another state. The vibrant colors, the intense smells of tropical fruits and spices, the constant heat, the rain that fell every day punctually in the middle of the afternoon, the slower pace of life. Everything conspired to create the feeling that we had truly left our past behind. We rented a small but airy house in the Marco neighborhood, not far from where Durvalina lived. Dad got a job at an import and export company thanks to a contact Durvalina had. The job paid less than his old railroad job, but offered the possibility of advancement. Mom, after a few weeks of searching, was hired as a substitute teacher at an elementary school. For me, the adaptation was more difficult. The school was completely different. People's accents, slang I didn't know, customs. Even the snack had flavors that were strange to my palate from the interior of Sao Paulo. In the first few weeks, I barely spoke to anyone, staying isolated in the corners of the courtyard during breaks. But little by little, something curious began to happen. Far from the environment where everyone knew me as the girl on the case, I slowly relearned how to be just Clotilde. Nobody there knew about my past. No one looked at me with that mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. It was a liberating anonymity. The first friendship I made was with Irasima, a girl with dark skin and an easy smile who sat at the desk next to mine. She adopted me, so to speak, deciding that I needed to learn the local customs. "Do you talk so funny?" she laughed, imitating my accent from the interior of Sao Paulo. "Come here, I want to show you what real acai is. Not this thing you people from the south call acai." With Irasima, I discovered the market see the weight. I tried fruits I didn't even know existed. I learned to ride a boat on the rivers that cut through the city. Her company, so carefree and cheerful, was like a balm to my wounded spirit. At home I also saw my parents changing, adapting. Dad abandoned the formal suits he always wore in Presidente Prudente, which were simply incompatible with the climate in Belém, and adopted light short-sleeved shirts. Mom let her hair grow long and often wore it down. Something I had never seen her do before. Small changes that symbolized something bigger. We were allowing ourselves to be different people, leaving behind not only the horror of what had happened, but also the rigid versions of ourselves that existed before. Of course, not everything was easy. There were nights when she still woke up screaming, drenched in cold sweat, certain that she had heard Grandpa's voice in the hallway. Days when an older man on the street, who bore some physical resemblance to him, would make me freeze in terror. Moments when the simple act of someone closing a door too hard would send me into a panic. I continued therapy with a new psychologist, Dr. Marta, to whom Mom told the whole truth so that she could help me properly. It wasn't the same as the sessions with Dr. Helena in Sao Paulo, but little by little we built a relationship of trust. Trauma doesn't go away just because you've moved, Dr. Marta explained in one of our first sessions, but you can learn to carry that history in a way that doesn't stop you from living fully. And that's what we slowly started to do, learning to carry our story in a new way. A year after our arrival in Bethlehem, Dad received a letter. It came from the lawyer who had taken care of the sale of our house in Presidente Prudente. It was short and to the point. Grandpa had died in prison. A massive heart attack during lunch in the cafeteria. Mom and Dad argued at length about whether they should tell me. I ended up hearing it by chance, listening behind the door, a habit that I had developed in Presidente Prudente and that I had not yet managed to completely abandon. When I confronted him about what I had heard, Mom hugged me, tears in her eyes. "He can't hurt you anymore, my child," she said. "Never again." I didn't cry. I felt no relief, no joy, no sadness. It was as if the news was about a stranger, someone I barely knew. I realized that in a sense, this was true. The man who had hurt me so deeply was not really my grandfather. He was a monster who wore his face. The true impact of the news came more slowly in the days and weeks that followed. I realized that I no longer had to constantly look over my shoulder, that we no longer had to keep our whereabouts a secret, that the fear that he might one day get out of prison and find us had finally dissipated. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from our shoulders. Our new life in Belém ceased to be an escape and became simply our life. In 1962, when I was 15, Dad was promoted to manager of the import-export company. The increase in salary allowed us to buy our own house, larger and airier, near the Rodrigues Alves forest. Mom got a permanent position as a teacher, and I, to everyone's surprise, including mine, I became one of the best students in my class. "Look at that," Dad commented proudly when I showed him my report card full of top grades. "Who would have thought, hey? Our daughter, the intellectual of the family." At the new school, I made more friends. I started participating in the theater group, discovering that acting, being someone else for a few hours, had a curious therapeutic effect on me. On stage, I stopped being Clotilde, the girl with a painful past, and became whoever the role required. It was in the school theater that I met Vicente when I was 16. He was 2 years older, in his final year, and played the lead role in the play in which I had a supporting role, tall, with dark skin and striking green eyes, inherited from a Portuguese grandfather. He explained later, "Vicente was my first true love." Our approach was slow. Unlike the other boys I had met, Vicente was never rushed or insistent. He seemed to intuitively understand my limits, my fears, although I had never told him about my past. Our first kiss happened after a particularly emotional performance. The play was successful. He was gentle, respectful, and for the first time, I felt no fear of another person's touch. It was as if something frozen inside me finally began to melt. Vicente and I dated for almost 2 years. He was my first boyfriend, my first experience of romantic love. From him I learned that physical intimacy could be beautiful, respectful, based on consent and mutual affection, the complete opposite of the violence that had marked my introduction to sexuality. Eventually, Vicente won a scholarship to study engineering in Rio de Janeiro. Our relationship did not survive the distance, but we parted with affection and respect. He went his own way and I went mine, but I will always be grateful for the role he played in my healing journey. In 1966, at the age of 19, I entered the Federal University of Para to study literature. It was there that I met Roberto, a law student with kind eyes and passionate ideas about social justice. He was from Santarém, the son of a businessman and a teacher, and had come to Belém specifically to study at the university. Our friendship began with a joint project between the courses in literature and law, an initiative to bring basic education to riverside communities. We spent hours discussing materials, planning lessons, occasionally discussing pedagogical approaches. It was a friendship based on mutual respect and shared interests. The relationship came almost a year later, naturally, as if it were the next logical step in a relationship that was already deep and meaningful. With Roberto, I finally found the courage to share my entire story, the abuse, the escape, the new beginning in Belém. He was the first person outside of my family and therapeutic circle to whom I told everything. His reaction was exactly what I needed: indignation at what had happened to me, without treating me as a broken victim, compassion without pity and, above all, an understanding that my past was part of me, but did not define me. "You are the strongest person I have ever met," he told me after hearing the whole story, holding my hands firmly. "And I love you. Just the way you are, with all your scars and all your strength." We married in 1970, when I was 23 and he was 25. It was a small but joyful ceremony at the church of São João Batista, near our new home. My parents, visibly moved, gave me up at the altar, both of them together, a break with tradition that made perfect sense for our family, which had survived the worst of nightmares together. The following years brought more healing, more joy, more milestones in a life that, against all odds, had become full and meaningful. Our first son, Paulo, was born in 1972. Mariana came in 1975 and finally Lucas in 1979. Having children was another important step in my healing journey. Each pregnancy, each birth was a way of reclaiming my body, of affirming that it was mine. Not an object of violence, but a vessel of life, of love, of continuity. With each child, I felt more connected to my own humanity, more complete and whole. Motherhood also brought new challenges and fears. I found myself being overprotective, especially of Mariana. The terror that something similar could happen to my mother. My daughter would sometimes wake me up at night in a cold sweat. It took a lot of inner work and a few additional therapy sessions to find the balance between protecting my children and allowing them to live their own lives free from the burden of my trauma. My parents were wonderful grandparents, present, loving, but always respectful of our space as a family. Dad retired in 1980 and devoted much of his time to his grandchildren, teaching them to fish, to fix things, to appreciate the little pleasures in life. Mom continued teaching until 1985, when she also retired and threw herself headfirst into the life of a grandmother. Life went on, bringing joys and sorrows, as it does for all families. I lost my father in 1990 from a sudden heart attack, the same fate that had befallen his executioner years earlier. An irony that was not lost on me. Mom lived longer, passing away peacefully in 2003, at the age of 84, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and even some great-grandchildren. Roberto and I stayed together, building a life I never imagined possible in the dark days of 1958. He became a respected lawyer, specializing in human rights and social causes. I became a university professor, sharing my love of literature with generations of young people. Our children grew up, starting families of their own. Paulo became a doctor. Mariana followed in my footsteps and became a teacher. Lucas chose engineering. Together they gave me 7 wonderful grandchildren who are now beginning to gift me with great-grandchildren. Today, at 79 years old, looking back on this long journey, I see clearly how the desperate plan my parents conceived at that kitchen table in 1959 completely changed the course of our lives. Not only did it keep me away from danger, but it also opened up paths we would never have taken if we had stayed in Presidente Prudent. That decision to leave, to rebuild everything from scratch, was the most courageous and loving act my parents could have done for me. They sacrificed the security of the known, risked everything for an uncertain future, just to give me the chance to heal, to grow, to live without the constant shadow of fear. The official justice system did its part, condemning the monster to prison, where he eventually met his end. But the true justice, the one that really mattered to our family, was the one we built with our own hands. The deliberate choice not to let that violence define the rest of our lives, the refusal to be victims forever, the determination to build something beautiful from the ruins. If there is one lesson that this long life has taught me and that I would like to share with you who watch me, it is that our power to heal is much greater than we imagine. No matter how deep the wounds, how dark the night, there is always the possibility of dawn. There is always a path to reconstruction, to redemption, to joy. My dear ones who have watched me thus far, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to this old woman tell her story. If my journey has touched your heart in any way, I ask that you leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Each subscription makes me feel that it was worth opening my heart, that my words can perhaps bring comfort or strength to someone who is going through their own valley of shadows. And if you want to hear more stories of overcoming like mine, join the channel's WhatsApp group. The link is in the description. There we share daily real stories from other grandmothers who, like me, carry stories of pain, resistance, and triumph. Stories that remind us that we are much stronger than we imagine, that our scars, although they never disappear completely, can become marks of honor that tell not only what we suffered, but mainly how we survived. Until the next video, my dears. May God bless the path of each one of you, and may you never lose hope, even on the darkest nights. This grandmother here is living proof that there is always light at the end of the tunnel. Yet, is light at the end of the tunnel. Yet, is light at the end of the tunnel. Yet, is light at the end of the tunnel. Yet, is light at the end of the tunnel. Yet, is light at the end of the tunnel. Yet, is light at the end of the tunnel. Yet, is light at the end of the tunnel.